Hello, everyone, and welcome to the launch of Workplace Gender Equity and Implementation Guide. My name is Dr. Isabel Kingsley, and I'm the Senior Research Associate for the Office of the Australian Government's Women in STEM Ambassador. I'm joining you today from the beautiful UNSW Sydney campus in Kensington. I would like to acknowledge the Bedegal people that are the traditional custodians of this land. I would also like to pay my respects to elders, both past and present, and extend that respect to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders who are present here today. I also want to note that this session is being recorded and it will be made available on the Women in STEM Ambassador YouTube channel. Now, we're here today to launch Workplace Gender Equity and Implementation Guide, which is our new tool to support workplaces on their gender equity journey. Gender equity in the workplace, particularly in the STEM sector, is crucial. It's a crucial issue, and it requires commitment from government, industry, and business leaders to drive that systemic change that's needed to create a more equitable STEM sector. Now, currently, only 1 in 10 women with a STEM qualification work in a STEM qualified industry. That's 1 in 10. This statistic points to 2 main issues: retention and progression. And many organizations tackle retention and progression by implementing gender equity programs. And we know that there's growing evidence that the way that programs are implemented can impact their success, which is why we created this resource. So, Workplace Gender Equity and Implementation Guide, authored by Susan Barnes and myself, is part of a suite of free evidence-based tools that support workplaces on their gender equity journey. So the guide has practical advice on how to develop and implement a gender equity program and avoid common pitfalls. We consulted with small organizations and even startups, as well as large organizations, to make sure that this guide can help organizations of any type and any size. So these sorts of practical tools and guides for workplaces will help create a more level playing field for everyone, regardless of gender. I think together we can work towards a future where everyone has an equal opportunity to success and thrive in their career. Today, we'll hear from the lead author of the guide, Susan Barnes, and she'll give you a quick overview of the guide, and then we will end today's session with a bit of a Q&A, so you can pop your questions in the chat at any time during the session. But before we begin, I'd like to pass on a message from the Australian Government's Women in STEM Ambassador, Professor Lisa Harvey-Smith. Lisa sends her sincere apologies and regrets not being able to be here today to welcome you to the event. Lisa's had to travel home to the UK to be with family, so we extend our best wishes to Lisa. All right, let's jump straight in and introduce you to the lead author of the guide, Susan Barnes. Susan is passionate about creating space for marginalized folk to feel welcome and to enjoy a fulfilling career in STEM. After almost 2 decades working in environmental science herself, she hung up her boots to do research, to research gender and the STEM workforce. So she completed her Master's of Research just last year in 2020, or sorry, we're in 2022, and her thesis is entitled Compromise and Symbolic Gestures: The Complexity of Implementing a Gender Equity Program in STEM Organizations in Australia. So pretty relevant. She's currently a PhD student at Macquarie University using science and technology studies to explore gendered interactions in Australian STEM organizations. in her spare time. You might find her reading, bushwalking, sewing, and even dancing. Susan, welcome and thank you for joining us, and thank you for producing this incredible tool.
Thank you, Isabel, and thank you so much for having me today.
So I would love for you to tell everyone the story of how this guide came about.
Yeah, sure. Well, it all starts in 2020, the year of years. I started my Master of Research then, and the pandemic hit. So I was in lockdown and I was feeling really isolated from the research community. So I started looking out for organizations working in the space I was interested in. Um, I cold emailed a bunch of people, and it was you, Isabel, who was kind enough to get back to me. So you and I met virtually, and we started having a few conversations about how research and the programs that you were working on kind of intersected. Um, and as we talked, we realized that some of the difficulties that you were experiencing in the anonymisation pilot that you were running at the time were kind of eerily similar to the issues I'd been reading about in the literature around compromise and pushback when we're kind of implementing these kinds of programs. So you and I realized together that there was kind of this social element to the implementation that wasn't being covered by your pilot, and that it would make a really great, fantastic master's project. So yeah, we kind of pulled that project off to the side, and I completed that. So I looked at the implementation of the evaluation that you were implementing in your pilot, and that became my master's thesis. And so then 3 years later, a thesis and a guideline later, here we are.
Yes, and so you talked about your thesis. Can you tell us? I mean, this would a lot of the things that you learned in your thesis you've pulled into this guide.
Yeah.
So, what are some of the things that you find organizations are typically doing well or are really successful at when implementing a gender equity program? And then part two of that question, on the flip side, what are some of those common pitfalls that organizations often fall into?
Yeah, sure. Um, So I think one of the things that I found in my research that organisations do really well is realising that there's going to be a little bit of opposition to these programs. Everyone that I spoke to kind of knew that they would encounter some pushback, and they were really willing to, fight for the programs, and they had really good intent. There was definitely a wonderful atmosphere of wanting to succeed. And I think along with that is management support. In general, I think that managers are on board and in fact are perhaps the people pushing the programs from the top. So I think that's another thing that organisations are doing quite well, is that it seems that management are on board with the idea that these programs are required.
Good, good.
Yeah. So I suppose part two of that is the pitfalls.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, so I think that, a couple of things that I saw is related to that management support again, but comes with resourcing and funding. And I think specifically time release. So lots of these programs are being implemented by people who already have a job and are expected to do this work on top of the role that they've already got. And so they're not really seeing a time release for work on the implementing the program. And that despite everyone's best efforts, it just leads to, a bit of resentment about the workload, but then also, things taking a long time to get done, yeah, which can, hold the whole process up. So some commitment to resourcing things properly, I think, is important.
Right,
Um,
right.
yeah, and I think the other thing, the common pitfall, is maybe trying to keep everyone happy. I think these programs are disrupting the status quo kind of by design, and not everyone's going to be okay with that. So it can be a really tough space working out, what is pushback or what is just feedback, and um, realizing that some people are kind of arguing in bad faith, and it's okay to move on without them. Um,
Mhm.
yeah, so there a little bit more work in that area, I think. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Well, I mean, it's good to know that one of the things that organizations are doing well is that there are a lot of managers. There is a lot of those people in leadership, senior leadership, who are really supportive. They want to see that change. We just need to make sure that they allocate the resources, the appropriate resources, so that those things can actually happen, which is what you're saying is one of those common pitfalls. Yeah, yeah, excellent. So those things are addressed in the guide. Can
Yes.
you tell us a little bit about the guide, how it's organized, some of its key features, and what people can expect to find in there?
Yeah, absolutely. So the guide really came about with my thesis as a basis, but kind of wanting to more broadly um, provide some guidance on, specific practical advice on how to implement gender equity programs. So that's how it's been written. It's starting with defining goals and selecting programs right through to getting up and running. It's broken into a 4-part iterative process, which have been written to show where you might revisit and refine different parts and improve the program each time, all while working towards getting that program up and running.
I like that it's an iterative process. That
Yeah,
spiral really shows that, it's not just linear, like from one thing to the other. When you get to the end, that's it. It really is, checking yourself and going through the
yeah,
process and then revisiting other sections and kind of tweaking as you go.
definitely. And managing the expectations of everyone that that's the process that you go through. It's not a straight line, and it really shouldn't be, because you need to be integrating the things that you're learning along the way.
Yeah.
Um, so it's got a very deliberate worksheet style, with bite-sized kind of thinking points, and then a place to write your own thoughts from your own organisation. We can see one of those forms here. There's a decision trees to help you figure out which of the options that are presented are right for your organisation. And there's also 2 examples from 2 different sized organisations that are presented in full, but then also peppered throughout the sections to help readers really relate to the points.
Excellent. I know that from one of our previous resources, an evaluation guide, that was one of the most useful things for the readers and the users of the guide, was those examples. So it's really nice to see those examples in there and peppered throughout, just to kind of, yeah, see one, do one, and you can kind of follow along. So that's really great. What else is in there?
Yeah, we've put some useful resources in the appendices,
Mm.
for like ideas for programs, potential questions from management, and how to spot and respond to pushback, really specific advice on those kinds of things. So yeah, the detail is kind of in the appendices. And then the worksheet style is complemented by a separate editable template that's a Word document that you can save as a working document to create your own program implementation plan. So if you're working through the guideline and you would like a bit more space, or you want to be able to present this kind of documentation in a more formal setting, then you can use that editable template and you'll have an implementation plan by the end.
Beautiful. That's so useful because you can just literally do all the work. You're reading through the guide. As you're reading things, you can be you can be
Yeah.
creating that plan, and moving that forward. And by the time you're done, you've got this that you can basically hand over to
Yes.
your colleagues, to your teammates, management, anything, and kind of say, this is the plan. Let's go ahead. All the thinking's been done. So that's really useful.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah.
That's the
So
idea.
yeah, well, it is the idea. So what's your favorite part of the guide? If there
Oh.
was maybe there's what's your favorite part? And then what's that one thing that, like, if we could only keep one thing, what's that one key message that you would keep?
Great questions. You asked me this question a couple of days ago, and it's such a hard one. I've been tossing up on my favorite part for a couple of days now. I wanted to say the workbook style, because I think that's going to be really useful, but I actually think it's the pushback section, providing kind of plain language ways to spot pushback, and then ways to respond that don't rely on compromising the program design, is going to be a game changer, I think. Yeah. And that kind of relates to my one key idea from the guide that I would keep, which is thinking deeper about the compromises that we're making. Often we start with ideal programs, which kind of have quite a robust design, and then implementation comes and reality hits, and the design can get whittled away by compromises. So, and this is not to say the compromise is bad. I'm a big fan. It's absolutely useful and often really necessary. But I think the guide draws attention to the specific impacts that compromise might have on the program design. And that then helps to make any compromises kind of an informed choice rather than just happening automatically. So, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And as you say, when we first chatted and when we first met, I was working on a gender equity program, implementing that in 4 different organizations in Australia, and working with the people who work in those organizations to get that change to happen. And really, one of the biggest challenge was the pushback, and being able to kind of get buy-in, and get buy-in from not everyone, like you said, but the right people to be able to progress it, and then managing those compromises, because there's some things that are fundamental to a program, and in the guide we call them building blocks, but those pieces of the program that are fundamental, for example, the program I was working on was anonymizing grant applications so that we could see if it actually changed the grant outcomes. And so I guess one of the fundamental things in that program is anonymization, and that's something that you can't really compromise on, because then you're losing the essence of the actual program. So those are really, really important things. I'm glad that you bring them up as your favorites or your key ideas, because I definitely experienced those, and so did the people working in those organizations who are working on implementing those programs.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that it's really natural to kind of want to bring everyone with you, and it's really difficult to work out what is pushback against an idea, and what is genuine feedback. Maybe this isn't going to work in the way the organization is structured or the workflows that we have at the moment. Picking that apart and working out when to compromise and when to say this is how it stands is difficult. And we've got some flowcharts and some decision trees in the guide that might help people with that.
Excellent. Perfect. Well, I know that people have a lot of questions, because I'm already seeing some questions coming in. So, but before we jump into the Q&A, I want to take this opportunity to thank the Commonwealth Department of Industry, Science and Resources for funding this project. I also want to thank everyone who's been involved in this project, including everyone who was involved in the consultation that you did, Susan, in the beginning and in the development of the guide, as well as our friends and our colleagues at various organizations who provided very valuable feedback and input on the guide. Thank you. Thank you also to the talented graphic designer Maria Mascara, and to our copy editor Katie Purvis. And I also specifically want to thank you, Susan. Susan brought invaluable expertise and a unique vision and insight to this project. She worked tirelessly, and her dedication to this project is very admirable. So Susan, you've been an absolute pleasure to work with. So thank you.
Thank you, Isabel, and likewise.
All right, it is now time to ask your questions. Some of you may have had a chance to quickly peek at the guide. We sent you a link just before the start of the event. So pop your questions in the chat, and we'll try to answer as many as we can, but we did want to leave a nice chunk of time, because that's the most important part of this event, is chatting with you guys, and answering your questions and having a bit of a conversation. So let me just bring these up. The first question, so gender equity programs clearly benefit women. Can you give
Mm.
us some examples of how they benefit other people, everyone? Because yeah, I guess these programs aren't just for women, like gender equity programs aren't just for women. Can you kind of elaborate on that or give us an example?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's a great question. So a couple of different points there. I suppose I'll start by saying that kind of gender is not just for women. Everyone has a gender, or everyone has a relationship with gender, even if you're non-binary. So I think, yeah, expanding our minds a bit beyond women and including trans and non-binary and gender non-conforming folk when we think gender, including those people into our mental models is really useful. And then also, men and people who are masculine presenting are disadvantaged by gender norms as well. So things in particular around carers leave, this is one of the examples that we provide in the guide, is someone wanting to take flexible work arrangements for caring for their children. And having that be available to everyone rather than only for women, kind of making the assumption that it's women who are doing the most of the caring roles, and that benefits everyone because then everyone's sharing that caring responsibility.
Yes, absolutely. And also thinking about intersectionality and bringing that intersectional lens to your programs, and that's obviously that's covered in the guide, but it's not only about gender either, is it?
Exactly. Yeah. So we do have a couple of sections where we talk about intersectionality and this idea that not only do people maybe have compounding disadvantage, so they might have other marginalizations apart from gender, like they might be disabled or be a racial minority, but also that there's, intersectionality means that there's a special something that happens to those people who have that compounding disadvantage that might not happen to the other separate groups. So yeah, we talk about that in the guideline and how to think through making sure that maybe the gender equity programs are going beyond gender and including other marginalizations as well.
Yeah, yeah, really important. The next question, someone wanted to know if we will receive a copy of the presentation, so I can assure you that yes, it will be. So it will be on our Women in STEM YouTube channel, but we can also send everyone a copy after the event. In a week or so when we've finished producing it, making it look nice, we can send everyone a copy of the presentation in case you want to just watch little bits of this again. Third question from Sonia. If management say we're supportive of change, but then don't fund resourcing for it, that's just lip service to make people feel happy. Is there a guideline or template for developing a business case to fund resourcing change?
Such a great question. So this guideline doesn't have that template for the specific business plan, but definitely that is part of our advice is stepping through the business plan. And it can also be, there is a section on resourcing. So really laying out exactly what resources you're going to need, and being really specific there can often help management see just what's involved. They might have a concept of just the 2 or 3 things they were thinking of, but actually you need 10 or 11 to really make it work. So there is a section there for that, but a specific business plan, not quite yet.
Yeah, but often it is just a lack of awareness from management that these things will need resources. So people think, oh, it'll just happen because it'll take 5 minutes or whatever. It's just a lack of awareness. So just like the section on resourcing really steps you through identifying what those resources you need, and kind of laying it out so that you can bring this to management and say, look, if we really want this project to succeed, we need A, B, C, and X, Y, and Z. And can you provide these things? Otherwise, things will slip, or we won't get the successful program we're hoping for. So it does really step you through kind of identifying those and creating that awareness to management so that they do support the support with resources the program appropriately.
Yeah.
Next question. Are there any resources that quantify the return on investment of this work in a succinct, clear manner that we can use to get the buy-in? So return on investment and buy-in.
Great question. That is a thing that we have, that's a concept that we've addressed when we're talking about pushback, because that's often a line that you might hear from like management or C-suite about cost benefit. And again, I think the resourcing section will really do this. But then also linking that to the compromise section, considering and conceptualizing the resources that are maybe you're having to justify as compromises. So thinking about them as compromises and working through that checklist so that it can then show, what's going to be missed out if we're not doing this part, and then making, educated, considered decisions as a team from there about what is worth spending money on versus what is the outcome going to be.
Yeah, yep, absolutely. Absolutely. Interesting question from the statistic that I quoted in the introduction. So how does the 1 to 10 STEM qualified women working in STEM number statistics that I said? So 1 in 10 STEM qualified women are working in a STEM qualified workforce. That's a statistic from the STEM Equity Monitor. The STEM Equity Monitor is a resource created by the Commonwealth Department of Industry, Science and Resources. So they're asking, how does that number compare to the numbers for men and non-binary people? And is there a disciplinary breakdown? So, Susan, I'll take that one.
Yes.
So there is disciplinary breakdown, and the STEM Equity Monitor is an incredible resource. I go there all the time to get to just to dig, because you can really, it's interactive, so you can select things and unselect things, so you can look at different years, different disciplines, all that stuff. So I really recommend going to it and having a play around with the disciplinary breakdowns. In terms of some statistics, I have a little fairy behind the scenes sending me some stats, but more than 1 in 5 men with a STEM qualified qualification work in a STEM qualified workforce. So 1 in 5 men versus 1 in 10 women. Data on non-binary people is not yet available. And that's because those data just aren't collected or haven't been collected for those years. But the recommendations have been to collect and review those data so that we can actually, understand better what's going on with those statistics and non-binary people. So great question, and thank you to the answer fairy. A question from Michelle. Do you have any suggestions on how to appeal to the values of leaders we need to buy in?
Great question. And yeah, we do address this. There's a section called Managing Up, which is all about getting the leaders on board, and recognizing that in different sized organizations, those leaders can be either quite removed from your position, up a few levels, or they might just be your direct boss. But definitely talking about comparisons to peer organizations, others in your field, and what the industry standards and norms are, and appealing to ideas about access to a really diverse and qualified workforce as well. There's a skills shortage in STEM, and so being able to create an organization that is genuinely equitable in its gender and other marginalizations diversity can be really attractive to people and help them, you know, come on board. So there are a couple of ideas, and there's more in the appendices.
Yeah, and I mean, any business leader, I mean, let's be honest, it's often about the bottom line. And there's so much evidence that shows that it is an economic benefit to have a diverse workforce. And so, if anything, being able to say that, being able to convince upper managers or leadership that this is just going to be an economic benefit for the organization, you know, that's money talks. So that's a good one. Let's see. Do we have? Can you please talk about some standout examples of gender equity programs that you saw during your research?
Oh, yeah. So this is an interesting question because I only looked at one particular program, which was the one that Isabel was running through the Women in STEM Ambassadors Office. So that was all around anonymisation, as Isabel said. So there are some other examples, though, in one of the appendices. We have provided some examples of some really common problems that people might have, and then the programs that might match with them to help solve them. So yeah, not much of an answer from me there. I'm sorry, because there was just one response from me, but there is more information in the appendices. Yeah, so check that out.
Yeah, and I'd like to add that the program that you studied in your master's thesis is it's actually a study. So it's a study that I'm leading actually,
Yes.
and anonymizing, for example, anonymizing grant applications or anonymizing job applications. There's mixed evidence out there that it works, or that it has the benefits that are intended. And so the study that we are still working on, actually, and the results will be coming out very, very soon, it explores that. It looks at, you know, what was going on? What were the grant outcomes looking like before we went to anonymous applications for telescope time or time on supercomputers? And then what were the grant outcomes after? Because there is mixed evidence out there, and sometimes it doesn't. It has been shown to have unintended consequences, and so so I wouldn't necessarily say that that is a great example of an equity program because the evidence is still mixed. We don't know if it's quite having the benefits that we wanted to. However, some things that, so we've got in Australia, we've got the Workplace Gender Equality Agency, WGEA, who run, well, they collect data from all organizations in Australia, all employers who have more than 100 employees. And so through their data, they've been able to really pinpoint what works. And one of the most effective ways of improving gender equity in a workplace is flexible working arrangements. And that's for that's for you know, like all genders at all levels. So not just, you know, not just lower level employees, but also management and senior level executives. So flexible working arrangements is a really effective program to implement in workplaces to achieve better equity for everyone. And another one is equal parental leave entitlements for all genders and employees at all levels again. So that really helps. And then getting really changing that culture to get men on board, taking parental leave, all of those things, you know, those programs really have a really positive impact on gender equity in workplaces. There Let me just look at the next question. Oh, yes. Another thing that coming back to that previous question of gender equity program examples. So one of the resources that our office recently launched is the STEM Equity Evaluation Portal. And it's a place where people can go and it's referenced in the guide, so you'll see it in there. But basically you go and you create your evaluation plan super easily, super quickly in the portal, but you can publish it, and there's already quite a few evaluations of programs there. So you can go to the STEM Equity Evaluation Portal, look at the programs that have been published to see what works and what works best in certain contexts and situations, because everything is contextual as well. So we've got to take that into consideration. Another question, great work. Someone said, great work. How does this guide differ from other implementation guides that that WGIA have published, for example?
Great question. And I think so the WGIA guide is quite strategic. That's talking at like a whole organization level, and really talking at a very high level about kind of gender equity strategies, whereas this guide is much more specific about the real nuts and bolts of implementation. It kind of starts where the WGIA guide stops in effect. So yeah, they're definitely complementary, I would say.
Complementary, and we reference the WGIA
Yes.
resources a lot because they do go hand in hand, and they are the experts at what they do. So definitely, we recommend going to some of their very specific resources to implement certain strategies or policy changes in your workplace. Yeah, absolutely. Well, look, I think that that's it for the questions so far, but very good questions. And thank you for everyone who's popped a question in there. Look, I want to end this session by thanking you, Susan, for joining us today and for having a bit of a chat and answering everyone's questions. Again, it's been an absolute pleasure working with you, and thanks for producing such a useful, practical resource for everyone.
And thank you, Isabel, and thank you to the Office for the Women in STEM Ambassador for giving me the opportunity and creating, to create this amazing resource for everyone and doing the work of getting the academic research kind of out into real practical outcomes for everyone to make use of.
Yes, yes, absolutely. Look, I also want to thank Australia's Women in STEM Ambassador herself, Professor Lisa Harvey-Smith, and her team, her awesome team who are with me right now, for their support and input in the guide. Thank you to the Commonwealth Department of Industry, Science and Resources for funding this project and their input as well in the guide, and everyone who has been involved in creating this tool. And finally, thank you for joining us today for the launch of the guide. You're obviously here today because you want to create change. And as we like to say in our office, to create change, you need to change something. So I encourage you to go to our website, download the guide and our other tools, and take action. Thank you, everyone, and have a lovely rest of your day.